Hey everyone, it's Raghu, and I'm back with Mindrolling, and I'm here with Mirabai Starr, who is a very old friend. But she's not old, not like we are, but it's nice to have you.
Thank you, Raghu. It's wonderful to be together again. We were just talking before we came on about how the only time we get to hang out and really have a conversation is on this podcast.
I know. Well, not quite, because Mirabai is also part of the Love Server member board. And so remember, we meet in Maui. We're going to meet up in Maui again at the end of this year. True. We are fortunate to be able to. Ram Dass created this. By the way, everybody, most of you, I'm sure, know who Mirabai is, but I do want to add that she lived at Lama, where Be Here Now was created, and has been connected to Ram Dass since she's 14 years old. Is that right?
This is true. Exactly right.
So, and now she's helping us further Ram Dass's teachings through the Love Server Member Foundation. And let's just start with, what do you think? How will we navigate? We're navigating some pretty intense stuff right now, and it's on everybody's mind. So I can't just sort of dismiss that. And how's your navigation going these days?
What I know is that I don't know. Like, if I just come back to not knowing with humility and humor, then I feel prepared to kind of step up and see what I can offer to this crazy world. It's from day to day, if I were to just gauge my mood or make my mood align to what's going on out in the world, I would be screwed. I can't figure out emotionally from day to day what to feel, what to think. And so I'm just trying to come back to zero. A lot of meditation training really helps come back to beginner's mind. I do feel a bit of a surge of hope right now on the U.S. landscape. I loved Ram Dass's teachings all those years that, here's how I would put it, separates church and state, but doesn't separate spirit from politics or the life of the soul from our lives as citizens of the world. So I feel much more hopeful in the U.S. landscape, and I'm still heartbroken for what's going on in the Holy Land and in Sudan and other places where
Ukraine,
Ukraine,
what's been going on
violence
for such a long time now. It's becoming unfathomable, all of it.
And for me, that heartbreak is not a problem. You know what I mean? It's like appropriate. And somehow I have to believe, Raghu, that our capacity to feel the pain of the world in our own bodies is our superpower. It is not only okay, but necessary.
Yeah, and that's a lot of what Ram Dass shared with us over the many years. You can be on more than one plane of consciousness at the same time, and that's absolutely a byword for these days, really. So Mirabai has written a number of books. Of course, you go to Mirabai.com. MirabaiStarr.com. We're so familiar with each other, so it's difficult there. And you can see what she's been doing, and it's phenomenal. And particularly what speaks to what we just referred to, of course, the difficulties that we are all going through right now, emotionally, philosophically, divided inside ourselves and outside ourselves. Everything that we're going through at this point, really, I thought of one of the first books that you wrote, and it was St. John and the Cross. And I think, many people may know of his reference to the dark night of the soul. So I think we can all sort of easily get into that reference. But can you speak to, I don't think we ever talked about this, and we've done podcasts and work together at retreats and so on, but I don't think I've ever heard you. How did this develop for you? And what, I know, of course, the tragedy that happened and this book came out of, but in a more general sense, how does this speak to you in the way that I'm kind of referring it, the dark night of the soul, and what St. John really represents for you?
Yeah, so my first book was a translation of Dark Night of the Soul, the mystical classic by the 16th century mystic, John of the Cross, Spanish monk. And so it was the first of, a dozen books at this point. And it didn't come out of my personal tragedy. Actually, it just came out of a love affair with John of the Cross. But it happened to coincide literally the day I received the first advance copy of my new book, my first book, a very literary translation, because I'm a literary translator, meaning the music of language is as important to me as any philosophical content. But the very day that the first advance copy arrived at my door, what you're referencing, Raghu, I think, is that my 14-year-old daughter, Jenny, was killed in a car accident. Yeah, so those two events, the emergence into the world of my first book, which happened to be a translation of the quintessential teachings on the transformational power of suffering, let's say, coincided with precisely the most unbearable loss I could have ever imagined having to navigate. And all kinds of things were kind of woven into that moment. One was, when you write a book and it's published, you're expected to step up and step out onto the world stage and represent that book, carry that book baby into the world, and do talks and interviews and retreats and workshops. And I didn't. I couldn't. And I also felt like that would be somehow a betrayal of my grief process, my mourning process. So I actually did the Jewish 1-year mourning cycle where you don't go out. But after that, turns out the world was waiting. They didn't care. The world went on. And I was able to then carry that work into the world, but in a integrated very much with my own experience of radical unknowing. So the dark night of the soul, like to really address that question, what did John of the Cross even mean by that? It really wasn't about external circumstances for him, having a difficult time, experiencing the death of a loved one or the ending of a significant relationship, or in many cases, for many of us, and some of you will relate to this, a bunch of losses all in a short period of time. We have sometimes those periods in our life where it's just one after another crash in on us, losses and betrayals and challenges of every kind. And it's like, oh my God, how am I going to, I can't withstand another one. And then here it comes. So people use that term, dark night of the soul, to describe those kinds of experiences. And I understand that that's the way that's translated by the culture. But what John of the Cross was referring to was a very, very private, deeply interior experience when you've been on a spiritual path for a while and you've been really committed to it and you've shown up for the hard work, not just the easy, fluffy, feel-good parts, but the discipline of spiritual life. But you're getting rewarded for it because you're experiencing bliss states maybe, or unitive moments where you experience your oneness with all that is, or you have insights. There are lots of goodies. John of the Cross called them consolations that come with the spiritual life that keep us motivated. And synchronicities and teachings that come, Dharma teachings that just feel like they were made for you. They just ring every bell in your body. So in a dark night of the soul, that stops. It's like, he says, it's like the door slams shut And all of that sweetness you'd been experiencing in the epiphanies and all of that just sort of dries up. It's very dry. You could call it the dry night of the soul. Mm-hmm. He says our sensual attachments are kind of taken from us, stripped. Sensual, he means that sensory experience of the felt presence of the sacred that we've been gifted with on our path. And then if we can stay with it and not run away, which we're very tempted to do, not try to fill that emptiness with like more spiritual practice. If I just keep meditating longer and praying harder and chanting louder, it'll come back. Mm-hmm. If we don't do that and we just breathe into it, we may graduate to that deeper dark night, which he calls the night of the spirit. First night was the night of sense. The second night, the other night, is the night of spirit, when not only are we not feeling it anymore, but we can't even conceive of God anymore, or the divine, or the spiritual path, or the guru, or the self, the true self. All of the teachings that sustained us become empty and almost ridiculous, almost offensive even.
You would call it a nihilistic emptiness.
Nihilistic emptiness. It just takes you to nothing. It's very humbling and even humiliating, because none of your tricks and techniques and methods and tools work. But the invitation, John of the Cross says, is to just be with it. Breathe into it. Don't run away. And what I've noticed is that teaching of the dark night maps beautifully on to the grief process, to the broken, open heart. If we can allow ourselves to be present with, yes, the annihilation of grief, the fire of grief that sweeps through our lives and takes the landscape to the ground. You know, it's completely counterintuitive, or it's certainly countercultural to stay with it. But if we do, and if we can, even for just moments, maybe not all the time, it's hard to sustain it, but moment by moment, if we can meet it, not as some grim spiritual exercise, look how strong my spiritual muscles are that I can endure unbearable suffering. No, as an act of love, of devotion. I'm going to stay right here out of love. My attention is my love offering. Then, not in a big dramatic way, for most of us anyway, but subtly, in a refined, gentle, tender way, our hearts begin to expand, to contain reality, really, to contain what is.
I would say, though, everybody, we should all recognize work. It takes practice.
Yeah.
To even get to the point where your perspective can include the reality of mindfulness, working with what is. So really, St. John of the Cross, he was preaching mindfulness, being with what is. Really.
And he totally was. And in my translation, I use that language a lot, being with what is. But when I wrote my memoir, Caravan of No Despair, and I think we did a conversation on that years ago.
Yeah, we did. Yep.
Yeah. I have a chapter called, toward the end, and it's my favorite chapter in the whole book. It's very short. It's like 3 pages, called Heartfulness. And it has to do with, and I know a lot of people use that term. We got in trouble for using it because people trademark these things. But a lot of us independently have come up with this term because it so beautifully evokes this. So my epiphany in my grieving process was, and it was when I was teaching mindfulness meditation. I was teaching to a group of students, and it was just feeling like, no, this isn't it. This isn't how you show up for grief. You don't mindfulness your way through your broken heart. What I realized I was doing was that I was staying present, being with what it is, as an act of devotion, an act of love, in my case, to my child. So she was dead. She wasn't coming back. This was reality. I was being with it. but not to prove something about how mindful I could be, how I could tough it out through mindfulness.
Yeah.
But it was the opposite. It was a softening and a yielding of my heart, saying, Jenny, that was her name, my child, I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm going to stay right here. I'm going to grieve you with my heart and mind open. I'm going to stay present because I love you. I'm not going to check out of this, because checking out of it, even through spiritual practice, we know we can do that. That's why they call it spiritual bypassing.
Yeah. Evasive tactics, I call it.
Yes, there are so many, and so many of us on the path have a great bunch of tricks to check out a reality if we so choose. But it was all about staying in the heart, and then the heart does. Pema Chodron talks about this too. When we stay present with what is, lovingly, compassionately, our hearts miraculously, magically expand, and we can hold what is.
Yeah,
it's not in vain that we make this effort.
And by the way, as you bring up Pema Chodron, we want to say to everyone, make a point of connecting with some of her work, because she has a way of delivering the Tibetan Buddhist canon in a practical way that is extraordinarily helpful. We'll put it in the show notes alongside, of course, and we haven't even brought this up, is Mirabai's new book called Ordinary Mysticism, Your Life as Sacred Ground, which will also have a link, and that will allow you to pre-order it, right? Because it's coming. We're here in just about August 2024, and it's going to come out in September, I believe. Am I right?
That's right, Raghu. Yes, and it really helps authors when people pre-order.
Yeah, and we know that quite well. Okay, what brought you around? Let's talk about it. What brought you around to wanting to share what this book is? And I think it's important. You know, I have espoused this through Mindrolling in a much different way, but in a way, as I said before, how to connect some of this incredible information, just leave it at that, teachings, okay, but information, so that one can act in a day-to-day way in balance and in harmony. And so just give us a little bit of what brought you to the book and what conceptually you were trying to share.
Well, as you mentioned, I grew up in and around Lama Foundation, here in the mountains of northern New Mexico, where Ram Dass and the Lama community created Be Here Now, that just changed the lives of probably everyone listening. If it hasn't yet, you're in for a life-changing blessing with that book, and all the other books that came from Ram Dass. But Lama, so I was 12 when we moved to Taos and began connecting with Lama, because Lama Foundation was running the school that my siblings and I went to in Taos. So there was this deep, strong connection. And all these teachers and teachings came through Lama and came through the school in Taos. I thought it was normal, you know, that Choyam Trungpa Rinpoche and Grandpa Joe from Taos Pueblo and Ram Dass and all of these teachers would come through and be with us. And Natalie Goldberg was our English teacher. Pema Chodron was our social studies teacher.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh. It was like that. So I'm telling you this because I come by my interspiritual orientation honestly through that. My parents were non-religious Jews from New York. Not only non-religious, they were anti-religion. And that plays into this actual trajectory that has brought me to this moment with this book, Ordinary Mysticism. But my parents just felt like organized religion was basically evil. They never used words like good versus evil, but responsible for much suffering in the world, especially Christianity. You know, that was the boogie monster of them all. And yet Lama and the school, Da Nahasli, it was called, which is Navajo for Return of the Spring, Da Nahasli school, were places where the spirit was celebrated through all of these different cultures and wisdom traditions. So I also learned that they all contain great treasures and they're all equally valid and equally true. It wasn't until I was a young adult and went to college that I discovered that there actually were people who were only one, you know, who had, and usually the path that they were born into, and felt that that was the only way. But also our peers, right, Raghu, who would say, like the buzz cliche, I should say, was, it's fine to appreciate all the world's religions and draw from the nectar of this flower and that one, but really eventually you should pick one and go deep. I can't tell you how many times I heard that as a kid growing up at Lama and in my 20s, and it didn't apply to me. It does apply to some people, but it didn't work for my wild heart that was falling in love with the presence of the divine everywhere I encountered it. Well, maybe not quite everywhere, because the evangelical fundamentalist versions of religion always turned me off right from the get-go. But the mystical heart of every tradition I encountered was irresistible to me. Yeah. And I felt like if I were to pick one to the exclusion of the others, it was almost like I'd be violating some kind of covenant with the God of love. And I couldn't do it. So it took me years to become mature enough to say, you know what, fuck you. I'm not going to pick one and go deep. I love them all. I am going to be polyamorous, spiritually speaking. And that's my nature. And I'm sure many of you can relate to that. But fast forward. Go ahead, Raghu.
I just want to, you prompted something in my mind that happened, and it's exactly addressing this. Yeah. I was once in India with Casey Tuari, and I brought my mom to India to meet Siddhima, which she did, and we had, it was wonderful. That's a whole other story. But everybody out there, Casey Tuari, brilliant disguise. You can watch that movie because he was one of the most incredible humans, and I say this in the picture, I ever met, not counting Maharaji or Siddhima. They were on another plane. And so off we went. And I knew he used to go into what's called samadhi, where the deepest, he was just one with the deepest presence of what is. I can't, I mean, I've had touches of this, that, or the other, but this man was extraordinary. And he was a yogi, but he was a schoolmaster. Anyhow, so there we are, Tuari, myself, and my mother. And he says to me, you can't just leave the original religion that you were in. It's fine to come to the East and and just immerse yourself in this, but you can't leave your original religion. Now, I would, like you, are you kidding? I just want to take advantage, like the bee and the flowers, of every flower. And so I had that little bit of a thing in my mind as he was saying this. But then he says, maybe you can sing a Jewish song for me. I'd just like to hear a Jewish song. My mother, who was not at all religious, but knew some of the prayers, right? So we started singing Ein Keloheinu. There's not only one, right? Yeah. Only one thing is going on. Ein Keloheinu. We got maybe 3 words in, and a little bit of the melody and our passion, gone. He went into samadhi. As if he was in a Hindu temple. He could have been in a Muslim, temple, whatever they call that. He could have been a mosque, yeah. He could have been anywhere, absolutely anywhere, hearing anything, and it would have sent him to the same place. Absolutely.
That's the best story, Raghu. I love that story. And that's Maharaji, and that's Ramdas. And,
Right.
you know, Maharaji was sub ek, and Ramdas was the person who taught me how to teach. You know, I teach a lot of workshops. I taught philosophy and religious studies for 20 years at the University of New Mexico. And since then, I've been just on the road with workshops and retreats. And it was Ramdas who taught me how to teach. And what I mean by that, well, I mean many things by that, but one of the things is that Ramdas would draw from the Tao Te Ching in the same lecture as the Bhagavad Gita, and then the Gospels of Thomas, the Gospel of Thomas, and you know, some Jewish principle, and it would all be effortlessly woven in to a single, let's call it Dharma talk. They were all these helpful illuminators for what it was he was trying to teach. And because of my background as a scholar of world religions, I'm able to do that too. But I think I went into that in graduate school very much because of Ramdas's influence and the magic of that ability to refer to these gorgeous texts with ease. And that's not because we skimmed the surface, nor did Ramdas. It wasn't just because we said sub-ek, oh, well, it's all one, it doesn't matter. It was because of a deep, intimate encounter with each of these spiritual traditions. So it's not fluffy.
Yeah, to say the least. Because we were, when we first met Neem Karoli Baba, who we called Maharaji, and many of us, I mean, there was a very small group. And I mean, when I first met him, there was 6 people, 6 or 7 people.
Wow.
You know? One of them, Krishna Das. And after the usual, I'm home, and all of the platitudes that all of us can give you, and it all sounds the same, he said, "Where's your cross?" And I'm thinking, cross? Like, I'm Jewish, I don't have a cross. The next day, of course, I went and got her. He's thinking, have a cross? I'll have a cross, you know. And then he went on about there was no difference between Hanuman and Christ. Yeah. Hanuman, the Indian Hindu monkey god, who was all about just completely humility and compassion and service and one-pointed love. Same as Christ, basically. So we started to understand that reality beyond any isms at all. This was like something so much deeper than any religion. And yeah, I think it's the core of what you're expressing in this book. It's the core of what mysticism is.
And it's because of those stories that I received from my elders coming back from India, you know, especially what Maharaji said about Christ, that I was able to overcome my parents, you know, the built-in resistance and suspicion that I had of Christianity from my parents, and open my heart to Christ, and why my first book was a translation of a Christian mystic.
Yeah, right.
Turns out many of my other books as well.
Yeah, right. That's so
but
great.
This book, now having laid the ground for my passion for all the world's mystical traditions, in this book, I'm deconstructing them. I'm letting them go. I think it's really important to just come clean with you, Raghu, and with all of you listening, that while I, of course, still love all of these great wisdom traditions, and at my books shelves, I'm looking at them. I'm in a newly built little studio. I'm surrounded by spiritual and religious books, texts that I still love. But it's almost like a couple of years ago, maybe 3, I started developing an allergy. You know, like you've been working with certain chemicals all your life as an artist or something, and then you start to have a reaction. That's what was starting to happen. The very tools that had sustained me, like literally my livelihood, were starting to become, I was like having this aversive reaction. And around that time, I was hosting a mystic summit for the Shift Network, where I was inviting all my friends, basically, because over these years I've, developed close relationships with many wisdom teachers. So I was inviting all of these people to be in dialogue with me about mysticism. And I invited Annie Lamott as one of my guests. And she, those of you who know Annie, she seems very spontaneous. She is very spontaneous, but she also really prepares. So she had prepared this whole talk that she called Mysticism 101. And it had 5 major points, which we barely got through because we both kept getting very excited about the conversation and going all over the place. But the conversation had a lot of juice. And at the end of it, Annie said, Mirabai, and this was, off camera, I think this is a book, and I'm not going to write it. I think you should write it.
Wow.
And people say that to me all the time. Does that happen to you, Raghu, where people say, I think you should do a book about, or you should do a
podcast.
Podcast or a project.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah.
And so I just usually politely smile and nod. But this time it was like, yup, you're right. Because what the structure, the framework she had given me was just delicious, and it was going to work. I knew it would work, and I would make it my own. And so I started working on it. It sold right away because it seemed to fit with the zeitgeist, the cultural consciousness. But as I began to work with this book, my sense of dismantling a lot of the architecture of the world's religions that I had been so devoted to, they started to crumble. And what began to emerge was this deeper love, this passion, this wildness, but also a quietude at the same time. Like, it's okay if I say no to all of those esoteric, layers in the Tibetan texts. I don't actually have to buy into every word of the New Testament in order to have an intimate relationship with Christ. And I could go on and on with each one of these traditions. So I guess I'm safeguarding the jewels that I've been given, but a lot of the rest of it is falling away or even going up in flames, and I'm kind of dancing in the fire in this book.
Yeah, lovely. Hey, you have a friend named James Finley.
Yes.
Who I don't know. But I love what you quoted him saying, if we are absolutely grounded in the absolute love of God that protects us from nothing, even as it sustains us all in all things, then we can face all things with courage and tenderness and touch the hurting places in others and in ourselves with love. Great quote. Where is this man? You never taught. You didn't turn me on to him before.
Oh my gosh!
Is he still with us?
Huge oversight. He is. He is a dear friend of mine. He lives in Santa Monica, so he's not far from you. In fact, James Finley or Jim Finley and I are teaching a workshop together in Santa Barbara in November. I think it's on my website. And yes, so we've taught together with Richard Rohr's community in Albuquerque, the Center for Action and Contemplation. But Jim is one of the true living mystics among us. He was a student of Thomas Merton's. He was a novice of Thomas Merton's when he was a teenager in the monastery at Gethsemane in Kentucky. And he carries that transmission of the great mystic activist Thomas Merton and is one of my favorite humans.
All right, well, we'll have to talk about that off the podcast about getting together. And I didn't know you were coming, so this is great.
Yes,
we're right around the corner.
Yes.
Right. We do know you're going to do something here in Ojai. All right. Hate to get into those kind of details, folks, but this is good. Anyhow, I love that quote.
But I do have to say, here's a Jim story and a Mirabai Starr disclosure that I wasn't prepared to disclose, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Okay.
Even at the same time that I am gleefully dismantling religiosity, I got baptized last fall by Jim Finley.
Really?
And my witnesses were Matthew Fox, Richard Rohr. Matthew Fox, Richard Rohr, Jim Finley, Sister Greta. And Father Greg Boyle.
Wow.
So some of the sort of living representatives of the mystical heart of Christianity all wanted to be there when they found out about this. Doesn't mean I'm a Christian now. What it means is it was the last tradition I had left to affirm in some kind of ceremonial way. And it was the day after Hamas attacked Israel. It was October 8th, 2023, that this happened. So we dedicated the entire ceremony, which we walked down to the Pacific Ocean and gathered water from the Pacific. Jim brought water from the Teresa of Avila's convent in Spain. I brought water from Our Lady of Guadalupe Basilica in Mexico. And Greg brought water from the River Jordan. And we mingled all the waters and dedicated this ritual to peace in the Middle East. So far, that hasn't seemed to have worked, but maybe maybe the ripples are still rippling.
No, we don't know the levels of anything.
So nobody knows this, and it's kind of shocking even for me to say it. I feel like my Jewish grandmother would be rolling in her grave. Does your mom know, though? My mom knows, and she cried. She thought, she cried not out of sadness, but out of sweetness. She just totally got it. I was a little worried. I was a little worried about telling you too, Raghu, but now I have.
Me? Yeah. Why?
Because my Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist mishpucha.
No, I was sitting right there, and I asked him for a mantra, or in the way that I said, "Hey, how should I meditate?" And we ended up with Christ Darshan the next day. So
no, I'm kidding. You totally get it, but a lot of people are a little on the shocked side.
Oh yeah. So there's a few things. I mean, there's so many things, and boy, time flies. In the book that I wanted to bring up, one of them is that really reminded me of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, where you talked about religious skepticism was baked into the cake of my upbringing. So you're not referring to it in the way His Holiness is, and you know this, is all about do not take anything for granted or just because a lama told you or anything. It has to be coming from the deepest part of your own experience, and you have to use, he would never say a skeptic's mind, but I would say to you, then you know this, that these retreats we do are all a combination of the heart, bhakti, and Buddhist discriminating wisdom, because at every retreat there's one of our Buddhist friends, and one of Ram Dass's old Buddhist friends, Jack Cornfield, and so on. And can you speak to that a little bit? Because I think that discriminating wisdom, which His Holiness is referring to, that must be there. And the fact that it's there with us, that includes the bhakti thing, which many people, I mean, there's the great story, I won't go into it in too much detail, but that Krishnadas tells about how Maharaji one day in Mumbai said to him, Krishnadas, courage is a very important thing. And then the translator, who was an old devotee named Barman, said, no, Maharaji, is Guru's grace. There's nothing else going on. And Maharaji turned again to Krishna and said, courage is a very important thing. And to me, that really speaks to what I'm referring to, related to discriminating wisdom and relating to using that connecting with that which is in each one of us, as you speak to in the book, that mystic part of ourselves that we can connect to, that makes us, very unique as human, in a human incarnation. So, can you speak a little bit to that, having that discriminating wisdom and how it can help?
Yeah, I think it's built into us. We have two wings so that we can fly, and one is wisdom and the other is compassion. Or, I think about the Buddha's last words when he was dying of food poisoning. And basically, that last teaching is distilled to be lamps unto yourselves. diligently pursue your own awakening. And so the two wings of the bird we see in Buddhism as a metaphor, the wing of wisdom and the wing of compassion. The bird can't fly without both. I think about on Shabbat in the Jewish tradition, there are two candles that are lit when the sun goes down on Friday, and we welcome the Sabbath. And some people say that those candles represent the braiding of sacred time and ordinary time that we need to carry back into our regular week, but we need a moment to really focus on bringing them together so that we can live our lives in both sacred and ordinary spaces. But there are two words in Hebrew, chesed, loving kindness, and gevura, which is like righteousness and discernment and discipline. And both, so the two candles that we light represent those two kind of realities.
I didn't even realize that. Of course, every Friday night we were doing it, but I was running away from it also at the time.
And I suspect your parents or your mother or whoever, usually it's the woman that lights the Shabbos candles, didn't necessarily know that. That's more of a mystical, Kabbalistic teaching.
Yeah. Right.
But we carry it in our bones, but we don't necessarily know.
Wish we did, though. Would have been a little bit different. I wouldn't have been as miserable as I was.
I think all of the great religions carry these mystical, these magnificent mystical teachings that would change everything if we knew about them.
Yeah.
But so in terms of living as an ordinary mystic, I truly believe, and this is the case I try to make in this book, that we are all mystics, and that our tendency to foist that status onto certain people and not others, usually not ourselves. Like the wisdom keepers are out there, and we are meant to just take in their wisdom. And in this book, I'm really calling all of us to reclaim the divinity of our own selves, the mystical self that has what I mean by mystical is the one who can be one with the one who has access to moments of unity and love and intimacy with the sacred. And that can happen in the ashram and the mosque and the synagogue and the church. Often there will be mystical moments in all of those spaces, but not only doesn't have to happen in those places and mediated through those metaphors, but often organized, institutionalized religious spaces and belief systems this is my feeling, can be an obstacle, an impediment to an actual mystical experience. If by mystical experience we mean an experience of intimacy with the sacred as love.
Yeah. Of course, if we didn't have, you just described what all of us went through, certainly in those days, the 60s, 70s, and since then, which was, created the kind of suffering that led us to further investigation of who we really were. So that was a gigantic contribution, really, that pushing us away, yet we had no delight in what the possibilities were, until for myself, actually for me, it was Mayor Baba. I saw a picture of him smiling, going, "Don't worry, be happy." I just wanted to be happy. So that opened the door for me. So, but to even, again, I think I brought this up a little before, to even get to a place, a perspective. This is why Ram Dass has been so great for so many people, because he presented a perspective from which you can live your life on a day-to-day basis that doesn't contain that glue to the story you tell yourself about who you think you are, the thoughts that you believe, the absolute attraction of your neurotic tendencies, even though you can say, I really like to get rid of them. Actually, they are so gratifying because we are used to them, which is another reason for meditative practice. But to get to the place where you can even have that perspective is again, practice, practice, practice. And I like you bring up Krishnas as the movie of me in the book, early in the book. And this is something I worked on for years with Duncan Trussell to create this audio book, the movie of me to the movie of we. And I think this is so crucial to, first, and Ram Dass elucidated with realizing, who you are, your role, your identity. You've got to absolutely be conscious of that. And to be able to leave some of that baggage behind, because it's just so self-centered. And, we walk around. I did this thing with Duncan after decades of doing all this spiritual work and so on. I was still tired of the way I so clearly saw my own motivations that were motivations of self-interest, and the beautiful phrase the Tibetans have, self-cherishing. I love that phrase. So all of this has to be dealt with. We try to do it with this book. And I think that's super important, right, Mirabai? That this, you have to engage with practice in order to even get to the point where you can recognize the mystic inside you.
Yeah, I have so many things I want to say in response to that, but I know we're running out of time, so I'll try to distill it. One is, for me, contemplative practice, meditation, the greatest gift it's given me is by sitting with my own mind for so many hours. I have learned to not believe everything I think.
Yeah.
So I can chuckle at myself when I start to think I am somebody or I'm not somebody.
This is number one thing, everybody. You're speaking to the core of what makes the most sense for me, and what I like to share is just that.
Yeah, it's an intimacy with your own mind, but it doesn't. So that's very helpful. What Ram Dass called the witness, cultivating that witness. But when we do attain usually fleeting moments of loosening our grip on that fixed sense of self, it seems to naturally open the heart, and then or at least warm the heart. Didn't Maharaji say something like, a saint's heart melts like butter? No, even more than butter. Butter melts when it comes close to the fire, but a saint's heart melts when it comes close to anybody else's fire or something like that. Am I getting that right?
Something like that, yeah.
And so our hearts sort of naturally flow into the collective, I think, when we practice being with what is. It just opens the space, and the rest of the world comes flowing in. And Ram Dass was so good at inviting us to not only cultivate a discipline of spiritual practice for our own awakening, but harvest the fruits of whatever we can in that space to feed the world, that there is no difference. And that, yes, everything's perfect, as Maharaji said, and as all the great wisdom teachers say, from Neem Karoli Baba to Julian of Norwich, who said, all will be well, and all will be well, and every kind of thing shall be well. And also, it's fucked up. It's broken. Tikkun olam in the mystical Jewish teachings, repairing the world. That's the highest invitation to a human being, is to mend the torn world. And they're not mutually exclusive. So I guess what I want to say finally is, it's not just about the wings of wisdom and compassion. There's the body in between that holds those wings, that is the framework onto which those wings are attached. And sometimes in our spiritual teachings, the body gets left behind. We focus on transcendence, personal transcendence, or we focus on self-sacrifice for the sake of others, and neglect the great, precious incarnation we've been given in these bodies that doesn't last very long. And so I'm very interested in the path of the ordinary mystic. Reclaiming the sacred in everyday life includes blessing the body and all the experiences of the body. And when you talk about those neuroses that we're trying to get over, we're practicing so hard and they're still there. You know, Ram Dass was also the schmooze. Yeah. Ram Dass was really good at saying, you know, I just befriend my schmooze. And I'm saying it in a different way in this book. How about not berating ourselves for not attaining some version of enlightenment that we've been conditioned to preconceive, you know, purification, perfection, all those patriarchal paradigms about what it means to be saved or enlightened. How about, you know, reclaiming exactly what we are as beautiful and intimate and beloved by the Holy One?
Yes, indeed. I love that. Well, I have one. This is a quote from Shanti Deva, right? The great Tibetan Buddhist. Actually, he was a sage. Shanti Deva, I believe, was a sage in North India at Nalanda, right?
Yes, yes.
Anyhow, this to me is the prescription for that. We ended this book, The Movie of Me, The Movie of We, with something from Ram Dass, which was him talking about compassion and generosity and how that had, and he told the story of somebody who was holding on to not being there for someone in pain because she didn't want to get too involved, a homeless person. Anyhow, it's just a beautiful thing. And the quote-unquote moral of the story was this if you surrender, and we didn't even get a chance to talk about surrender, Mirabai. I had a whole thing with KKs. You know, we'll do it again. We'll address some of the other parts here because they're important. But once you leave yourself to honor, help, serve, whatever it is, you forget yourself. And you forget your separation, basically.
Right.
You know? So this is Shanti Deva. All the joy the world contains has come through wishing happiness for others. That's the prescription, right? That's the prescription. Oh boy, it's great to talk about. It's great to hang here like we've just done. Huh?
Yes, I loved every minute of it, and I hope you all got something out of our rambling and playful conversation. We've had a lot of heavy conversations because, you know, we've both been through a lot of heavy things, and it's really refreshing for me in this book. You know, Publishers Weekly talked about my playful voice. I was like, thank you. That's the nicest thing you could have said, because for all my serious books, you know, finally in this one, it's like the inner child has been set free.
That's great.
Thanks for playing with me, Raghu.
Absolutely. Ordinary Mysticism, our friends who are going to do the show notes, we'll have a link there so you can pre-order it, which again really helps with getting the book way more, people can get way more aware of it, mainly through Amazon. I mean, that's just our reality. There's nothing to do. Pre-order it from Amazon. Don't think about it.
Talk about being with what is. It's
right.
It's of our culture.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So the links will be there, and links like Pema Chodron and also St. John of the Cross, and I love Teresa of Avila. So the guys and gals will put together different ways in which to interact. And MirabaiStarr.com, by the way, it's beautiful. I mean, I had not really seen it, Mirabai. It's a beautiful site. I like the artwork and the feel of it. It's really great.
The artwork is all Willow, my partner.
It's all Willow. Oh, yes, who I know. Yeah.
It's exquisite.
Oh, that's so great. So everybody, this is Mindrolling on Be Here Now. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com and take advantage of many of the people that Mirabai and I are quite friendly with, and who have been so meaningful in Ram Dass's universe. And that's why it's the Ram Dass Be Here Now Network. And we will see you next week.
Thanks, Raghu.